Has Russell T Davies killed Doctor Who? Is the show dead? Well, kinda, but not really. But maybe? Oh, I'll speak about that later. Guten Tag, and welcome to a brand new video, and welcome to my review of the Giggle. That is the only time I'm doing that German accent. I'm not keeping that up the whole way through, but yes, welcome to my review of the third and final Doctor Who 60th anniversary special titled The Giggle, which will see the departure of David Tennant as the 14th Doctor, as always in inverted commas, and boy will we get onto that later, and see the introduction of Ncuti Gatwa. Finally, after all this time, he'll be making his first appearance as the 15th Doctor in this story. Now, this video has taken a very long time to come out. Usually I like to kind of record these initially after I watch the episodes and then get the reviews out very, very quickly. Ultimately, this hasn't happened. You're probably all aware that this has taken almost a week to come out. That's because I quite possibly had the busiest week of my life recently. I've been very busy. I couldn't watch the episode on Saturday because I had a friend coming over. Then I had more friends coming over on Sunday, so the earliest I could actually watch this special was the Sunday evening, at which point I was far too tired to record the review and get it edited. And then I was very busy on Monday, Tuesday, then I was fully hungover on Wednesday, and then yet again busy on the Thursday as well. So it seems I have literally not had any time to record this review, and even now, when I finally have some time to record it, I seem to have developed a bit of a cold. So if I sound a bit bunged up in this review, I do apologise, but unfortunately it just had to be done. I just had to record this now, because if I didn't record it now, I honestly don't know when I'd find more time to record it. It's just been one of those weeks, you know, heaven forbid I have a social life. The Giggle. I really don't know how I feel about this one, because I'm sure you've all probably guessed that I wasn't a very big fan of the Bi-Regeneration. I mean, I spoke about it in a couple of other videos, that is, if you're wondering what I was alluding to, that got leaked, that was so hilariously outlandish that people shared it around because they thought this leak sounds so ridiculous, it can't possibly be true. Well, it was true. And I didn't like the sound of it in the leak, and it's not any better on screen. If not, it's a bit worse than I thought it would be. But my general thoughts after watching it was the first 45 minutes were really good, and it's just the ending and everything with the Bi-Generation that really sucked. But on closer, reflection, and obviously because I've had a bit longer in between watching the episode and recording this review, so I've had a bit longer to think about this and process it, I'm not actually sure the rest of the episode was that good either. It certainly got fantastic moments and scenes and sequences, but that whole package as a story, as an episode, I'm not sure that element of it, ignoring the Bi-Regeneration, what else the episode's trying to do, I'm not quite sure that really comes together either. And some of it I really don't think works at all. I'm struggling to call it bad. I'm very reluctant to call this story bad, but I don't think I can call it anywhere close to good either. Really, I think it's just a few memorable sequences that are really holding this story up, and one certain character and performance that is really holding this story together. And I want to talk about Bi-Regeneration and my problems with that at the back end of this review, because I'm sure it will probably take up the bulk of what I end up talking about. But I want to talk about the rest of the story first, and I want to talk about what I liked, the thing that I overwhelmingly enjoyed in this story, and that was Neil Patrick Harris as the Toymaker. He was amazing. Obviously, we know Neil Patrick Harris is a great actor. He's a bit of a get for Doctor Who. I'll be honest, I was quite surprised when I saw he was announced, because Doctor Who getting this massive American actor to be just a guest star in a story is something that very rarely happens, and was very much an indicator from the get-go of Russell T Davies's pull. And obviously we've seen you know, more recently stuff to do with the Disney deal and that kind of thing. So it was more of an indicator of, oh, Rusty Davies clearly has a bit more sway in the general, you know, TV and film world than perhaps I thought he did. A stroke of genius from Rusty Davies to bring the Celestial Toymaker back, because the Toymaker is an interesting one in the sense that in terms of, you know, how fans think of the Toymaker and his kind of status in terms of, you know, the pantheon of villains and how we kind of think about him, he's very much kind of held in regard as one of the great old fearsome foes of Doctor Who. But he actually only ever appeared in one televised story, The Celestial Toymaker, in 1966, I want to say it is. Which is a story which is not only mostly missing, so you can't actually watch it, but it's actually, funnily, a story that isn't actually that good. As someone who has, you know, gone and watched the recon of the Celestial Toymaker, it's a story where its ideas and the idea of the Toymaker is truly amazing, but the actual story itself isn't very good. It's very much a product of its time in the sense that they're working with a BBC budget at a time when they'd kind of ran out of money because the previous production team went purposely over budget on the previous story, and William Hartnell also had to go on a holiday during this story. They're working with, you know, elements of what they can find in the BBC cupboards. You know, it's very much a compromised production, and that means that even though the idea of the Toymaker as this, you know, big celestial, you know, being who is not bound to our rules of reality, you know, he's not humanoid, he's not flesh and blood. He is more so an idea than anyone else, you know, this powerful godlike figure who lives in his own dimension and uses our own logic, you know, as his toys, as his playthings. He can do so much that we just can't even comprehend, you know. He is so above our level of understanding and our reality. And that is such a brilliant idea in this godlike being who has all these powers, who just views us mere mortals as playthings and becomes obsessed with games, obsessed with the winning and losing. He could do everything with these powers, but he just wants to toy with people. And the fact that if you lose to a game to him, you are stuck as his playthings in his domain forever, forced to play out his constant games over and over again with no hope of escape. A fate worse than death is very, very creepy. And the Toymaker has such these big, you know, ideas surrounding him of he could be such a great villain, but that's never really done to its full potential in the original Celestial Toymaker story. Just obviously his virtues of it's a compromised production, because it was a story right slap bang towards the end of you know, the third season of Doctor Who, when they'd run out of money, and there's lots of behind the scenes politics going on, lots of rewrites in that story. But how Rusty Davies has interpreted the Toymaker in this story feels as if it's, you know, taking the ideas of what we think of the Toymaker, you know, his kind of grandiose status in the Doctor Who fandom and all the great ideas surrounding him, and really try to, you know, actually do those ideas and do the character on paper of the Toymaker justice in a way that the original story didn't and probably never could. Because everything to do with the opening scene of the assistant to John Logie Baird, you know, going into the toy shop, and the Celestial Toymaker just trying to advertise these dolls and these board games, and his enthusiasm, which quickly is switched to a sinister edge when he mentions that he probably killed a woman to create the hair for the Stooky Bill doll, because I might forget it. So I will just want to mention Murray Gold's music in this story is really great. I've been really impressed with his music across these specials. I absolutely sung its praises in last week's episode, and even though it's not quite as on that level, because that's one of his best scores, it's still really good here. Obviously the kind of laughing tune for the Toymaker, even the opening little Victorian style music that we get as the bloke's walking down the street through the rain into the toy shop, it's all great stuff, great mood setter. But that opening scene's really effective, because you also get a sense of, as I said, the sinister edge with the Toymaker almost breaking facade, you know, from this extremely happy, you know, obviously caricature of a German Toymaker inventor, eccentric type, you know, to the sinister edge of all. I took that hair off of a beautiful lady, she won't miss it, but then she'll never miss anything again. I like the implication that she's become a plaything of the Toymaker, and that's such a great description of the horrifying fate that happens to you if you lose to the Toymaker in a game. It's all set up brilliantly there, and then obviously when the Doctor goes back to the shop, and we get the scene, which was obviously released a clip of, the ball is the first game ever to be invented. That whole bit where, you know, he's doing a very sinister thing about how humans discovered balls, you know, you threw it, you killed a man, and then the human thought, oh, what fun, and all of a sudden everyone's doing it. You know, I love how he can take very childish, simple games and really make them sinister. It's such a unwavering confidence about the Toymaker, almost arrogance. He views himself as superior to everyone else, but it's an arrogance that manifests itself in such a playful way that it's just so entertaining to watch. You know, there's that little bit where he drops the German accent in the opening scene, and, you know, he makes that very rude remark, the assistant to John Logie Baird, you know, he has that English accent, and then all of a sudden he puts the German accent back on. You know, there's the bit where he drops the German accent again, you know, to the Doctor before putting it back in and approaching his playful edge. It's a great mishmash of performances from Neil Patrick Harris, and I love that scene where the Doctor goes into the shop, he's playing with the board games, and he recognises the Toymaker. And you get some really nice flashbacks to, obviously, Michael Gough as a Toymaker, William Hartnell as the Doctor, just brief little glimpses. I was wondering whether they'd actually play the clip from the original Celestial Toymaker story, because there's a very apt line from the Doctor where Dodo says, oh, we'll never see the end of him, and the Doctor says, oh, there will be other meetings in another time, I'm sure of it. There's a very apt line. I wonder, will they play that clip at the start of this episode, in a similar vein to Twice Upon a Time, where we play the clips from the 10th Planet before leading into the story? That doesn't happen. But I was glad that we did get a brief little, you know, glimpse of those two, because it really establishes the history between them. And then we venture into the Toymaker's domain, which is amazing. Again, the Toymaker's domain is this truly otherworldly place where ideas of logic just don't apply there. There's another great idea of the original Celestial Toymaker story that obviously isn't quite allowed to happen, but we get it here. And it's great, you know, these liminal corridors, never ending. Each door takes you to another set of doors. You know, the Doctor tries to go back and opens the original door to the shop, only to find that that's been replaced by yet another hallway of doors. It is great, and something that, you know, truly you can't quite figure out because there's no logic to it. It's just whatever the Toymaker wants, you're in his domain, which I like that Donna points out. And I'm very happy that the Toymaker's domain actually made a feature in this, because I think I said in my last review that, you know, obviously in the original story it's all set in the Toymaker's domain, and I wasn't quite sure of taking the Toymaker out of his domain and taking him into the real world, because I feel like you lose so much of an element of the Toymaker, which is his domain, which is an aspect to him which is so scary. And it's something that, while we don't see it ultimately done too effectively in the original story, there is actually a fan animation by Dino Puff, which is amazing. It's a fan animation of the first part of the Celestial Toymaker story, the Celestial Toy Room. It's split into two parts, and it's amazing, and I just want to sing its praises here, because in that story we really get the sense of the Toymaker as this endless, voidless space where anything could happen, and the Toymaker really framed and presented as this ultimate godlike figure who can move things around just by thought, and who has such power over everyone, in the fact that wherever you go in this domain you can't trust anything. The idea of his henchmen ultimately just being tortured servants who were in the same position as the Doctor and the companions, but lost a game and are now forced to play the Toymaker's games, you know, taking on the persona of clowns for all eternity. And there's a great bit in that animation where, when the clowns fail at the game and are forced to replay it by the Toymaker, you can see them crying, and it's like, oh, they didn't cheat at the game originally because you know, the Toymaker wanted them to cheat. It's clearly something that they're doing to betray the Toymaker, because they hope that if they're able to win, if they're able to beat Stephen and Dodo and win, then they will be able to be set free of this living hell of constantly being forced to live as dolls and play the Toymaker's games forever. It's a really nice touch that almost doesn't come across that well in the original story. It's a bit left ambiguous to, are they just the Toymaker's henchmen, or are they actually, you know, people who are forced to be his playthings? It's never quite, you know, made clear, and also it raises the question of, oh, was the Toymaker actually cheating, or was he not? You know, when kind of the whole thing is that he doesn't cheat. Well, it's not that he doesn't cheat. He will kind of, not necessarily cheat, but he will find loopholes to exploit the game, because he only plays the rules of the game, but he will exploit very dubious loopholes to get to his victory. But he doesn't outright cheat. So that animation really clears that up, and it's just a great animation. I'll leave a link to it down below, because especially in the light of the official BBC animation that's been announced that doesn't look that good, I'd like you to all go and support this Dino Puff animation for the first part, because honestly, it's the best way of watching that original Celestial Toymaker story, at least the first part, and yeah, has so many visual flourishes and ideas surrounding the Toymaker in his world that I think are brilliant, and I'm glad were not necessarily carried over to this story, because obviously when they were filming this story it was before that animation was released, but kind of ideas surrounding the Toymaker that isn't very clear in the original story that both get carried over to this, which is great. You know, if we see the Toymaker's playthings, which I said is a nice aspect of that animation that isn't very clear in the original story, but we see it here. There's a really creepy visual of the guy who we saw at the start, the John Lady Baird's assistant, and he is essentially trapped as a living puppet. You know, his body has been contorted into that of a wooden puppet, and he's on strings, and you see that bit where his body drops to the floor, and you notice that his neck, in the form of, like, you have like a ventriloquist dummy where it goes bobbles up and down, it's on a little stick that goes into a hole in his body. Oh, it's creepy. And as someone who, the most disturbing thing to me, it is body horror. It is that idea of someone being able to do that to you and thinking, oh my god, what if that happened to me? Oh my god, you know, that kind of thing, which I mentioned was a great strength for Wild Blue Yonder. It happens again here. It's the fear of, oh my god, what if I lost a game to the Toymaker and had, you know, ended up like this. It's the specific line, it's not just the imagery, which is really great, but it's the line of, oh, but I couldn't go home. What would Mummy do if she saw me like this? Oh, it's really creepy. That is a scene straight out of a horror movie. It's another one, like Wild Blue Yonder, where it's almost a bit too scary for Doctor Who, and I'm surprised they managed to get away with that. But then when you see the Toymaker grow and play with him on strings, it's a fate worse than death, and that really articulates, you know, yes, the Toymaker's doing a bit of zaniness, but he's a truly evil character, and being stuck as his playthings is a fate worse than death. It's a very existentially horrifying. Donna again with the dolls, and you've got the Stoogie Bill's widow. That's a very creepy as well, an underlying threat of, yeah, just unnervingness. It's great. Everything's set in the Toymaker's domain. Neil Patrick Harris himself is a Toymaker. He's both incredibly creepy, but also very, you know, enthralling to watch. He's having so much fun with it, but it never feels a bit too campy. He always maintains that level of threat. It's a very good balancing of tones with his character. And it's just different because, you know, at the end of the day, we have been stuck in the routine of just, oh, it's the Daleks assignment of the Master who's in this finale. Let's spin the wheel and see which one it is. When there are so many great Doctor Who villains in the pantheon of monsters, and the Celestial Toymaker is a great example of a villain who is just something a little bit different. And it offers the story so much, and it offers the Doctor so much, because he can't just do his usual tricks, because how do you beat a godlike figure who doesn't, you know, apply to the rules of logic? You can only beat him at his own game, follow the rules of the game. Easily the best stuff in this episode, and when I say this episode has memorable sequences, that's sort of what I'm talking about. And you also have the bit where he gives the Doctor, you know, a little bit of a tour through his previous companions, you know, in between when David Tennant was last on the show and now. So you've got Amy, Clara, Bill, and then the Flux, because Yaz, Dan, Ryan and Graham obviously didn't die, and that's what this is all about. It's essentially just showcasing their deaths and kind of pinning that blame on the Doctor, because whenever the Doctor tries to justify, oh, well, they didn't really die, you know, well, the Toymaker's like, well, that's alright then, you know, in this very cheesy American voice, but it does pack such a punch, you know, to essentially say, you know, you're just trying to justify the fact that you essentially let them die, you know, just because in some sci-fi techno-babbly way, they got to live, you know, they still technically died, they can't go back to their normal life, and that's on you, Doctor. And it's a great moment that really riles the Doctor up to force him to yes, I challenge you, Toymaker, to a game. This is where it gets a bit weird, though, because there's a big thing on the story of, well, you've got to challenge the Toymaker to a game. We've even got the guy who ends up as a puppet saying, oh, I went back and, you know, he had to ask him to play a game. But obviously a big part of the original Celestial Toymaker story is that the Toymaker kind of forces you into a game. You know, it's kind of, if you ever happen to unfortunately stumble across his domain, you have to play a game. If you win, you can leave. If you lose, you remain as a plaything. He essentially kind of forces your hand. Kind of a similar thing to, let's say, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, where it's kind of those things, if you ever unfortunately happen to stumble into that part of America, you know, your car happens to break down, you know, in that area, you're then presented with the family in the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. They're not going to leave that place, they're not actively seeking people out, but if you happen to, you know, if you happen to stumble across their house, you know, that's when they get you. And it's kind of a similar thing with the Toymaker, in which, you know, if you ever happen to accidentally stumble across his domain, well, there you go. There's also other contradictions where, you know, it's kind of at the end of the story, but you get a prize for beating the Toymaker. That was never a thing in the original story. It was kind of the thing of, oh, if you win, you get to live. That's your prize. You don't become a plaything of the Toymaker. You know, if you beat him, you get to live, and that's all you get. You know, that's enough. Which I think makes him a lot more sinister than, oh, you get a prize afterwards, because the whole thing is the Toymaker's a sore loser. Whatever. It's a story from 1966. I'm not gonna, you know, hold up this story on not being identically close in terms of the logistics of the Toymaker to a lost story in 1966. That would probably be quite harsh of me. Even his games, though, in this instance, feel a bit crap. You know, his games were never that great in the original story. You know, the whole Trilogic game isn't a great visual game to play. I think the Blowman's buff is a bit better because you can make something so childish seem so tense. But in some of these games, they just don't, I think, miss the point of playing a game with the Toymaker, really. Like, the Doctor suggests, oh, let's cut the pack, essentially, as his game. But why would the Doctor choose a game that is purely based on luck? Because if you have the option to pick any game to challenge the Toymaker at, why wouldn't he pick a game that he has an advantage at versus the Toymaker, something that he could use his intelligence to beat the Toymaker at? Which there's so many games in which, you know, you can play the game in which you have to use your mind in the game to outwit the opponent, therefore giving the Doctor a better chance at winning. Whereas cut the pack only based on luck. There is no, you know, intelligence to be used in that sense. You know, it's all based on luck, and obviously the Toymaker wins. But the Doctor didn't have to choose a game purely based on luck. He could have chose a game in which, you know, he actually could have used his brain to outsmart the Toymaker and win. That's what he does in the original story. He uses his brain to outsmart the Toymaker and use a loophole in his own game, like the Toymaker tries to exploit. And he wins. He has to use his brain to outsmart the Toymaker to win the game. The Doctor never really has to do that here. He purposely chooses a game in which he can't do that, which seems really weird and redundant. I know he's got the ace up his sleeve, that best of 3, but you could have just ended it in 2 and given yourself a better chance. I don't really get that. And obviously the whole catch at the end, it's just, while not being very cinematic, also seems a bit weird. Was there nothing a bit more grandiose that they could have done rather than just a simple game of catch? I know it's a callback to "The ball is the first game ever to be invented" that we get before, but, you know, at the end of the day, I think there just would have been something that would have felt a bit more satisfying as a final game for the Toymaker. Something that, like in the original story, the Doctor actually has to, or the Doctors in this instance, actually have to use their minds to outwit the Toymaker at, where they actually have to beat him. But they don't actually do anything here. It's purely on the Toymaker that he just happens to not be able to catch the ball. You know, it's just, again, luck, hoping that the Toymaker is rubbish at catch, and then the Toymaker essentially defeats himself by not being able to catch the ball. I don't know. I think you could have come up with a much better game in both instances, but especially the end. Those are a couple of nitpicks with the Toymaker, really, you know. The games are a bit crap, some of the logic isn't identical to how he works in the original story, but ultimately those are only nitpicks to what is generally a great reappearance of the Toymaker. And I've mentioned that, yes, all the scenes set in the past in the shop and in his domain are really great. But what about the stuff in the modern day? Well, that is where this episode for me, ignoring the Bi-Regeneration, really falls apart. Because the whole plan of the Giggle, the plot, essentially what the episode's hinging on, the main plot of the episode, doesn't really work at all. I don't think in any aspect, to be quite honest with you. It starts off with the Stooky Bill puppets and John Logie Baird and the invention of television, which I think is a great initial idea. I think an episode exploring the invention of television and that creepy image, which is a real image of the first ever broadcast image being of this creepy doll that got burnt, is a really cool idea and something that's rife for a Doctor Who story. It's bizarre that it's never been done before. And the Stooky Bill puppet in and of itself is really creepy. You know, I would call him the Giggle Chad. Am I going to leave it in? I might cut that out, actually. That was awful. But the story kind of suffers from two aspects. The plot not being explored enough at all, and the plot itself not really having any solid foundations to start with. I'll talk about what didn't work for me on initial broadcast, which is that ultimately this plotline of everyone seeing the Giggle in their screens and then it making everyone think that they're right and causing chaos is not something that is explored at all. Ultimately, we see one brief little street view scene in which the Doctor encounters someone on the street, which, FYI, was filmed in Bristol, very close to me. And I've actually walked down that street many times, been in that bar in the background many times. That was very odd to see that filmed. I remember when they were filming it, I think I mentioned it at the time, but I wish I could have gone because it's very close to me, but I was stuck in an A-level exam at the time, and considering I'm in my second year of uni now, that just shows how long it has been between them filming that and when the episodes have come out. And then also there's a Weston-super-Mare mention, which is my hometown, by the way, so yeah, weird references to the area I'm from. Took me out a little bit, I'm going to be honest, but I suppose it's quite nice. That whole little street view scene, which is nice, but it's the only bit we actually see of the Giggle and what it's actually affecting people, and the only aspects that we actually really experience that through. Elsewhere in the story is just supposedly happening in the background, but what you really need to see to make this idea and concept work is you need to see it happen on the ground. You need to be immersed, surrounded by people. It's something that Rusty Davies always used to fundamentally get right, so I find it really weird how we don't get that here. You know, you think of something like The Poison Sky. Why the whole thing about the cars or stuff, why that works, is because you see the perspective of Wilf and Sylvia and Wilf getting stuck in the car and all that kind of stuff. You need to see that on the ground. You know, the whole thing of, the Master Race or the Daleks invasion, but you see how that affects characters. And it's not like we don't have these characters set up. We set up the Noble family in the Star Beast with, you've got Rose, you've got what's his face, Sean, you've got Sylvia there as well. I know obviously Wilf couldn't have been in it, but you've already established those characters, so how about we see the effects on them, or we show the world from their perspective? You know, how about we do that? You've already got these foundations, it wouldn't have been hard, and then we actually could have got a good sense of what the Giggle is doing to people, make it more clear, and just explore the concept a bit more, but the episode kind of shoves it to the side. In fact, it's crazy to me, and my dad pointed this out, and I thought, that's crazy, that Donna not once actually expresses any concern to go back and see her family. You'd think, with all this chaos going on, she'd think, oh shit, my daughter, I've got to go back and see how they're doing, and that's your avenue to get a more street level presence of the Giggle in this story. But she never shows any concern about them, which is odd considering she shows so much concern about them in World Blue Yonder, but she never seems to hear. And the plotline of the Giggle would have worked so much better and been so much more engaging, and we'll be able to explore it a lot more if we'd been focused on seeing it through maybe the eyes of the Noble family, and the Doctor and Donna go home, and that's how they discover the Giggle, rather than going to Unit and then it's all just in the background, and rather than actually seeing it happen through characters on the ground, we're just told about it from people in the sky. It's one of the weaker choices in this story to not base it on the ground, but instead base it in Unit. Unit in this story, not great, I'll be honest. I think maybe it's just annoying because there's so much more of an interesting angle in regards to the Giggle plotline, which is, let's look at it on the floor, look at it the ground view, the everyday perspective, because that's who this is affecting. But instead we go up to the big Unit tower where everything is just happening in the background, and are just, rather than seeing things, just told things. We see things on screens that supposedly happened, but why couldn't have we seen this? It's a really weird choice to spend most of this episode in Unit Tower rather than on the ground. I just hate the idea of Unit Tower in general. All I could think of it's just this bland set, the Doctor just being told things by his ultra-military presence. It just feels like a rip-off of S.H.I.E.L.D. in Marvel, which is not helped by the Unit Tower just being a rip-off of Avengers Tower. And speaking of being a rip-off of Marvel, this is actually a problem that Marvel struggles with as well in lots of their films, especially their recent ones. You never see, you've got all these big alien invasions, but you never actually see, the perspective of the people on the ground. You never see them saving civilians or understand that perspective. It's always, that's just kind of, it's happening in the background, but you never really get to see it or how that truly affects people. And that's a problem this story has. You never really see how the Giggle affects people truly. You're just told about it, and the episode doesn't really spend much time bothering with that. So yeah, Unit just feels like a rip-off of Marvel, and because it's a rip-off of Marvel, it fundamentally brings Marvel flaws into it. Another Marvel flaw to do with Unit is that, yes, Unit's only here to set up a future spin-off, and there's a couple of bits in this story which just feel like the episode is more concerned with setting characters up and plot lines up for the future, rather than bothering with its own narrative. It's a problem that lots of Marvel films have, in the sense that they're too preoccupied with future installments that they don't really care about the story they're telling at hand, and the story they're telling at hand really suffers as a result. In the sense that we only have Unit in this story just to set them up. It makes no sense in the narrative of the story for Unit to be here, or for us to focus on them so much. As I said, it makes so much more sense for the narrative of the story to experience it on the ground and not just be sent straight to Unit. Because, all you learn from Unit is stuff that would have been better learned through actually the characters seeing it. And yeah, all Unit is just this big white room, and Unit doesn't really do anything to fix the problem. So there's no reason for Unit to be in this story other than to set them up for future stories. So yeah, that whole aspect of everything to do with Unit hurts this story a lot, and really hurts the Giggle plotline, because the problem is, because it's all in the background, we have no real focus on it, and it just kind of gets forgotten about in the story. It's such an afterthought, and that's supposed to be the main plotline of this, when really all it is it just feels like just a way of an inciting incident just to get the Doctor to go back in time and meet the Toymaker. That's all it is. It's not got much to it as an actual plotline, which is the episode treats it as for a bit and then just drops it. And then you've got the main meat and potatoes of the story, if you want to say, as really lackluster, unexplored concept that is just supposedly happening in the background. And supposedly that's the Toymaker's main plan. That's why he's doing this, is to create the Giggle. But ultimately it feels like such an afterthought in this story that it doesn't feel like his main plan at all. The focus is not on it at all. And it feels like a lot of that is because of the runtime, because we've got to do so much in such a short amount of time. We've got to go through all these plot points at a breakneck pace, very much like the Star Beast. That story struggled with it too. But in this instance, it feels like it's squeezing so much into this story just to set things up, when you don't have to set things up in this way. The Toymaker actually suffers a bit from this as well, because he's giving his speech about he played games with the universe, and then he mentions, oh, but there's one person I never wanted to play with. The one who waits. But by having him essentially undercut himself by saying, oh yeah, but there's someone out there who's far worse than me, you've instantly undercut the threat from this villain. Instantly the Toymaker doesn't seem as intimidating after that, because you're like, oh well, you're not even that bad, are you, if there's someone who's worse. And it's weird, because a scene before that, they're trying so much to hype the Toymaker up as the worst thing you've ever seen. Donna literally says, there's no one we've ever faced who is quite as terrifying as this. Then they just undercut that by the Toymaker saying, oh yeah, but there's someone who's far worse. You undercut the villainous nature and the malice of this villain just to try and set up someone for a future series. Why do that? You've just taken the wind out of the sails of your villain just to try and set up someone who's worse. Instantly undercuts the Toymaker to me, and is a really bad move. I don't mind it if it's like, oh, just as the Toymaker's defeated, he then mentions, oh, but there's someone else coming. You see that a lot. I don't mind it at the end of his journey, but not in the middle of the episode, to stop dead, to hype up a future villain. Really bad move, because it completely undercuts what the Toymaker, is trying to say. It completely undercuts his presence as a villain. Like I say, it takes the wind right out of his sails. Really strange decision. And yeah, there's so much of this story that just feels there to set up and service future arcs and stories, rather than actually be interested in its own plot. This episode seems bored with itself. It seems bored with the ideas that it's playing with. And yeah, it feels like it would much rather skip ahead to write future stories, rather than actually take care in writing the story at hand. Which, if that is actually the case, then why did Russell agree to write these stories anyway? It doesn't seem that he's too bothered with the actual plot of this one, and I think you can tell from a writing standpoint. I've spoken about how, this Giggle plotline isn't explored enough in the story itself, which means it's really lackluster, and it is. This episode really doesn't feel that bothered with this storyline, and I think that's a shame, because it really lets the side down when the main plot of the episode is really, really unexplored, and it just feels like wasted potential. But then the more I think about it, I'm not even sure the plotline itself actually works fundamentally in and of itself, mainly because it's not really explored enough, but also its logic just doesn't really work. So what is the Giggle? Well, the Giggle is supposedly makes everyone think they're right, makes everyone think their opinion is supreme. Okay, sure, whatever. The problem is that this episode wants to have its cake and eat it too. It wants to say that, the Giggle making everyone think their opinion is supreme is an allegory for how we all act in the modern day. Okay, whatever. But then it also wants to make the point that, well, yes, that is how we're like in the modern day. That is what humans are like. They think their opinion is supreme. But then what you fundamentally realise is that, well, if all humans think their opinion is fundamentally supreme, and that's why we have the problems we do in the world, then what's the point of the Giggle in the first place? It's not really affecting that much, is it? If humans are already like that anyway. The allegory gets really confused with, you're making an allegory, to explore an idea that already exists in the people you're exploring it with, so why even create the allegory? You either make it a straight up, character flaw, where this is a character flaw of them, like it actually legitimately is in the real world, and you have that be the basis of the story. Or, if you want to have the Giggle as an effective allegory, it needs to occur to a race that are nothing like humans, who don't have our same flaws. So if you do have a race, let's say, that are unlike us in the sense they don't have our flaws, and then you give the Giggle to them and it makes them think their opinion's supreme, then you are simulating how, our own world. You are simulating how the news and the media and our experiences make us incredibly self-righteous and think that we're better than anyone else and our opinion's better than anyone else. And you almost simulate that through sci-fi means to another race by saying, the Giggle affecting this other race and making them think that is an allegory for how the news and the media and social media makes us think that we're incredibly self-righteous. And you can even, if you want to make the allegory really obvious, you can even mention by the Toymaker that, this plan was inspired by, how humans act. I thought that was so funny that I take how humans and their emotions and their self-righteousness and would transpire that to another race. You can even have that if you think, if you want to make it really obvious. The problem is, though, as I said, this idea and allegory is really bungled from the beginning because it doesn't work, because this episode wants to be a mirror to the real world, but that's all it is. It's a mirror. That's all this political allegory is. I'd struggle to even call it an allegory, because with a political allegory, you actually have to explore something. All this episode is a mirror. All it is saying, yes, people are self-righteous in this world. People only care about their opinions and think they're supreme and only care about themselves, and that's the problem of this world. Look at all these politicians. All they care about is themselves. But it's got nothing more to say than that. All this episode wants to say is, yes, and this exists. Isn't the real world bad? But how about you explore those ideas? How about you offer a solution as to how we can fix the real world? This episode never does. All it is a mirror. But it's not really trying to say anything. All it does is just, points out that these things in our world exist. You're going to explore those ideas that you've brought up? Are you going to, offer any solutions to these problems? Going to explore how it affects the characters? No. You just want to say that they exist. But you don't want to explore the political ideas that you've brought up, only that they exist in our real world. It's a mirror of our real world, but with nothing to say. And that's, the problem with this. Rusty Davies wants to make it seem like this is some great political allegory, but it doesn't do anything with the ideas that it sets up. As I said, the world is so bad now, Rusty Davies. Well, what's your solutions to fixing that problem? He never answers those questions. The Giggle doesn't work because it's both trying to be a reflection of humanity in the real world, but also on top of that affect humanity in the real world, despite the human flaws they already have. So therefore it just becomes bungled. It's just like, well, you either have humans having these flaws originally, and that's the problem, like it is in the real world, or it's the Giggle giving them those flaws, and that's the problem. But the episode wants to do it both ways. You even got a scene where they're like, look at the Prime Minister, he's been affected by the Giggle, he cares about no one but himself, and Donna's like, well, no change there then. Well, yes, there is no change there then, but you're essentially just pointing out that the Giggle actually doesn't change anyone, because people are already like that. By saying, yes, the Prime Minister, is a self-righteous asshole in our world and doesn't care about anyone. Well, yes, you're right. But by saying that, you've just announced that the whole point of the Giggle and its effect on people doesn't even work, because the flaws that the Giggle is implanting into people are flaws that they already exert. So what is the point of the Giggle? There is no point. There is no point to the Toymaker's plan. If you want to go with the very overtly, nature of, let's, call out the politicians and the prime ministers for all the shit and hell they've put us through the last few years, then you can do that. If you want to. If you still want to have that very clear, obvious parallel to our real world and not over jumble it with sci-fi nonsense, here's what you can do, and here's an idea that I thought of. Again, another way you can take this, where you get rid of the Giggle concept entirely, and perhaps the Toymaker challenges the world leaders to a game. And because of their self-righteousness, them believing that they're always right, that they have some supreme ability to win and are better than anyone else, they accept the offer to the Toymaker and they gamble all of humanity as a result. They put all of humanity on the line as the stakes because they're so up themselves and self-righteous to think that they'd win, to think that they'd beat the Toymaker. They're so full of themselves that they think they'll win, they think they're right. And it's that aspect that, forces them to play a game with the Toymaker, a game that they would never win, they were always going to lose. And they think they're so right, they've got such self-righteousness, and view themselves as supreme to all others, that ultimately they're willing to gamble the lives of millions of people in a game with the Toymaker just because they're so hell-bent on the fact that they'll win. And then ultimately, when they lose, they doom all of humanity to being the Toymaker's playthings forever, just because they thought they'd win, and they gambled their lives as a result. I wonder what that's very, familiar with. Is that, very reminiscent of the world leaders and politicians during COVID, particularly in this country? Yes. And that is essentially the allegory of what Russell is trying to do in this story, but I think that works better in this narrative because you're pinning it more so on the world leaders, and you're exploiting that flaw, that you're exploiting the self-righteousness and the superiority of these people, but you're exploiting the human flaw rather than giving them the human flaw that they already have. The giggle is such a needless thing because the story works without the giggle even needing to be existing, so the idea of the giggle and the Toymaker's plan is pointless. Ultimately, not only were you showcasing that self-righteousness, that politicians have, not only is it a very clear allegory for how the world leaders treated us during COVID by gambling with our lives, essentially, like they're doing in, playing this game with the Toymaker, gambling with our lives because they're convinced they'll win, even though it's obvious they'd lose. But also it would create a really cool parallel, at least in my opinion, to the world leaders, the Prime Minister, and the Toymaker. Are they so different? Not necessarily. Always think they're right, they always think they'll win, and ultimately all that matters to the Toymaker, as he says in this story, is all that matters is to win or to lose, and that's essentially all that the Prime Minister cares about. He doesn't care about lives, he just cares about whether he wins or he loses. And then you can open up the example of, the similarities between how the Toymaker operates and how world leaders operate, and then ultimately, is being a plaything of the Toymaker, any different to how we are currently, which is essentially playthings at the mercy of the government. And this idea all stemmed from, because I said you could fix the idea of the giggle by just making the giggle happen to a different race, but I think you can actually make the allegory better by having the world leaders play a game with the Toymaker, and that idea stemmed from the fact that, to me, the Giggle plan doesn't really seem like something the Toymaker would do. You can say, yes, but the 21st century, cancelling people and, everyone thinking they're right and shouting matches, that's the funniest game of all. And that sounds clever, until you actually give it any amount of thought and you realise that, but it's not a game, is it? Because anything you can refer to it as a game, or it's like the Joker where anything can be referred to as a joke. But it's not though, is it? It's not a joke. This isn't a game, and just because the Toymaker can describe it as a game in a line of dialogue and make him sound all so clever, it's not a game though, is it? It's not really anything the Toymaker would do. The Toymaker doesn't care about cancelling people, he doesn't care about that kind of stuff. As he said, he only cares about who wins and who loses, and he wants to outwit people and have them be his playthings. So to me, in this, version of the story, the Toymaker is still challenging them to a game, which is his thing. That's what he does. He challenges people to games. He wants to play games with people and have them as his playthings. He gets no enjoyment out of this, I can't imagine. No enjoyment out of everyone thinking they're right and the world just going crazy because they watch something on a screen. It just doesn't really work for me, because the social reasons for why the Toymaker does that, I just don't really see as something the Toymaker really care about. They feel very disconnected. The plot and the person who's doing them feel very disconnected, and I don't think it's helped that we don't really see much of the Toymaker in the real world, actually interacting with those people or with the Giggle itself, so it does feel very disconnected. And apparently this story actually was originally just going to be about the Stooky Bill doll having the Giggle, and then Rusty Davies thought that actually we need more of a menacing presence, we'll bring in the Toymaker. And ultimately the fact that this story and this plotline of the Giggle was brought about before the Toymaker was, makes a lot of sense, because it doesn't feel like something the Toymaker would do, and it feels very disconnected. Ultimately, by having the Giggle even in this story, you've removed the agency from humans, you've removed the agency from them, and thus you've removed the idea of it's humans who are flawed, because you've removed their agency of, you know, using their flaws to do bad things, flaws that exist in us and our society. You've removed that agency by having the Giggle affect us, so really the idea of the human flaw doesn't really work. This whole Giggle plotline, it's not explored enough, it doesn't go anywhere. The political commentary that it's attempting to do doesn't work because the story doesn't go anywhere. It feels cheap, it feels like hollow political commentary. Yes, these are things that exist in our real world, but the allegory doesn't work and the ideas aren't explored enough. You're not actually, you know, giving us a solution to these problems. All UNIT does is just explode a satellite. Right, cheers for that very real in-world, you know, explanation as to how we can fix everything that's going on in our real world, Russell. And it's very funny because people say, oh yes, this is very clearly an angry script from Rusty Davies. It's very clearly a loaded script. But it's an angry script with nothing to say. A script that's angry about things in our real world, but has no intention of actually exploring them in the piece of media. You know, all it is saying, these ideas exist. This is a mirror to our world, but you don't want to do anything more with them. And thus, the political commentary is redundant. On a side note, I just find it hilarious when the Toymaker mentions cancelling. I can't take it serious when people mention cancelling as a real thing in pieces of media. It really takes me out. And obviously in this instance it's a bit weird, because what are you trying to say, that people who cancel people always think they're right? Because really what it should be is people who get cancelled always think they're right, because they can't actually understand that sometimes actions have consequences, and rather than accept that, they just go on about being cancelled all the time. Which is also deeply a bit because two of the people who were in Series 1, Rusty Davies' original series, where there was lots of stuff behind the scenes, got cancelled in Noel Clarke and John Barrowman, and Russell has never made a public stance on that, so bit murky to bring up cancel culture there, Russell, some dodgy implications. But yeah, people say, oh, it's an angry script, and yeah, sure it is. But it goes back to an interview that Rusty Davies said where, yes, the young writers of today, the reason why they're not getting any jobs is because they only care about representation and politics and political ideas, but they have no intention of writing a story. They just want these ideas to exist, but they're not concerned about how you weave those ideas into a story about those ideas and how you actually explore that as allegorical. You know, they don't understand how to write stories about political commentary, only that they want the political commentary to exist. Which is always a bit of a dodgy interview, because at the end of the day, it just seems like an old writer who is still being afforded jobs in the writing world and blocking younger writers from getting those jobs by still existing, having a pop at those younger writers that he probably got into TV in the first place, inspired them, and having a pop at them. It is very much old man shouts at cloud. Not a very good interview, I don't like it. But obviously the irony is he was saying that they're just angry writers, angry about the world, but with no attempt of actually exploring those ideas. Well, that's exactly what this script is from Rusty Davies, so a bit hypocritical from you there, Russell. He's just, we live in a society as a Doctor Who villain, and obviously the joke about the phrase we live in a society is because, well, yeah, we do live in a society, but that's such a basic statement. Like, are you going to actually explain anything about society, do anything with it, or are you just going to make the blanket statement that we live in a society? That's why so many people take the mick out of the phrase, and it really feels like the Toymaker's plan in this episode is the embodiment of we live in a society. Trying to make a statement, but it's such a blanket statement, but you're not really doing anything with it. You're not really exploring any elements, you're not really examining any ideas, proposing any solutions. You're just pointing out the fact. It's pointing out the fact we live in a society, pointing out that the world is shit. Yeah, I know it is, but what of it? Can't believe that Rusty Davies, who is known for such great, cutting, biting political commentary, serves something up as vapid and hollow as this episode. But yeah, as a whole, I just don't think this Giggle plotline works at all. It's not explored in the episode enough because we don't see it from the street view, so we don't actually explore the concept at all, which is why I think the concept of what the Giggle even is really a bit ambiguous and vague. This episode never really wants to explain what it is. It contradicts itself in different scenes. Like the stuff with the guy on the street is completely different to how we're shown it affects Kate. So I don't really get what it's supposed to be there. But yeah, it's not explored in the episode enough. The episode almost purposely ditches it in favour of setting up other stuff rather than doing what the story should have done, which is shown the ground view. It just gets forgotten in the third act, has political ideas that it doesn't even bother to explore. A bungled allegory that doesn't even work because they wants to have its cake and eat it too in terms of the human flaws, and also it's not even something that the Toymaker would do anyway and feels very disconnected to everything else he does in the original episode. So this is the thing, it was like, yes, I really like the Toymaker and the stuff in the shop and the stuff in his domain and Neil Patrick Harris's performance. But everything else, like the plot surrounding the Giggle, I'm just not sure it's that good, guys. And my initial reaction upon watching it was, the first 45 minutes are really good. It's only the Bi-Regeneration and the ending that really fucks it up. Drops the ball, pardon the pun. But I'm not so sure it is. I'm not so sure the episode itself is that great anyway. Other than the sequences involving the Toymaker in his domain and Neil Patrick Harris's performance, everything else, it's just not great. None of it really comes together. It's just a jumble of desperate ideas that aren't really satisfying. And yeah, you could argue that it's a victim of this episode being too short, too many ideas happening at once, you have to rush everything. But if that's the case, then don't do this story. Don't have a story where you need all these desperate ideas. No one was forcing you to do this big classical RTD style finale. You could have had it just as a more simple low-stakes story. How about, Rose stumbles across the Toymaker and accidentally plays a game with him, and that's your stakes. You've got to get Rose back from the Toymaker, and the Doctor has to go into the Toymaker's domain. There's so many simpler ways to bring back the Toymaker than doing this story, so if you say, the story wasn't long enough, well, Russell knew how long the story was going to be. That's his own fault for having too many ideas and none of them coming together. That's his problem. It's the same as the Star Beast. He knew how long that story was going to be. He didn't have to mash all these ideas in. And at the end of the day, it's stuff that I criticised Chibnall for, so I'm going to criticise Rusty Davies for it here. Lots of these stories have felt very Chibnall-like, actually. So many desperate ideas that are all great in and of themselves, but none of them come together or really get explored. A breakneck pace, which does allow for the story to breathe. Great moments, but ultimately a really rubbish ending that is actually really controversial. The Giggle is essentially the Timeless Child. It's essentially the Timeless Children. Not just in terms of the lore stuff, but the rest of the story as well. Like, yeah, the Bi-Regeneration isn't great, but the rest of the story isn't that great, elsewhere. And the problem is I really like some of the Toymaker stuff, so I'm really reluctant to call the story bad, but I just don't know if I can call it great either, as I've established. It just feels like Russell massively dropped the ball in this one, far too preoccupied with what he was going to write in the future to really care about what he was writing now. It's a story that really doesn't feel that interested in its own plot, and that doesn't make this a very satisfying story to sit through. Now for the part that you guys are really here for. This is my thoughts on Bi-Regeneration. Oh boy, was that a controversial inclusion into the episode. This whole ending can't really be disconnected from the idea of Bi-Generation, because it's the whole wrap-up of this story, which is a shame because it's one of those episodes in which it can't really be separated from its controversial element, and it's hard to really appreciate and look back on the story without thinking of what a mess this whole thing was. Although in this review I've kind of spoken about how even apart from this ending, the rest of the story isn't perfect, and there's a lot of sloppy stuff in there. I don't think the rest of it's great. It does have some really good moments and set pieces and sequences, completely undercut by this ending. Now, if you have been in the know, and certainly if you've been watching these reviews, you would know that certain aspects of these 60th anniversary specials got leaked. And essentially the entire plot of this episode got leaked, and one of the things that got leaked was Bi-Regeneration, and this was the main idea that people saw and thought, oh my god, that's so ridiculous, so outlandish, would be so terrible, that there's no way that that's actually true. Well, guess what? It was true. And so many people were saying, well, guys, if it is true, just wait until you watch the episode before making a judgment, because, you know, there are some parts of Doctor Who that if you wrote them down on paper, it would sound stupid, but in execution, they're fine. And I thought, oh, okay, so let's wait until we watch it. Obviously, I saw a leak, thought that's absolutely atrocious, but wait for the episode. And I'll be honest, the episode's execution of Bi-Regeneration wasn't any better than the leak suggested. I'd actually argue it's worse, because at least in the leak it implies that some of it's actually explained and we actually get some answers. In the episode, none of it's explained. We get no answers. It's so random. It's just terrible. But this has been a long time coming for me, really. If you have been a regular viewer of the channel ever since Rusty Davies was announced as coming back from showrunner, you would know that I've been incredibly sceptical of the BBC just trying to turn back the clocks and pretend it's 2008 again when the show was popular, because they are very envious of the viewership and the brand notoriety and just the sheer popularity and presence that Doctor Who had back when it initially came back, and from 2005 throughout the David Tennant and Rusty Davies era. It's when it was at its peak in the UK, at least. I know it was probably most popular overseas during that Smith's time, but obviously its peak was in the UK, was in, 2008 Series 4 David Tennant, Catherine Tate times, and they've been trying to kind of grab hold of that and turn the clocks back to 2008 for a long time. It predates Rusty Davies coming back. We saw it with elements of Jodie Whittaker, the style very much being kind of a poor man's RTD kitchen sink Earthbound drama style stuff, with the Earth invasions, the companions' families, the supposed grounded characters, which never really worked. It was a poor man's idea of what Rusty Davies' Doctor Who was. Then you had aspects like the Judoon coming back, the alternate Doctor and the Fob Watch. Obviously, Captain Jack coming back, I think, was the big one where it became really obvious that, oh my god, this is a character you remember from the Rusty Davies era. Please, Rusty Davies fans, come back to the show. Please come back and watch us. That was the big one for me where you noticed that, I think. And even outside of the show, you had stuff like Time Lord Victorious, a massive multimedia event that wasn't spearheaded by the main Doctor, Jodie Whittaker, but was spearheaded by featuring David Tennant, a Doctor from many, many years ago. You had the video game that featured Jodie Whittaker, but also David Tennant out of all of the Doctors. The comics featured David Tennant constantly crossing over with Jodie Whittaker in order to boost sales. So ultimately, this is a long time coming. During Jodie Whittaker's era, the BBC were really trying to remind you that this is the show that used to have David Tennant in the hopes of bringing back all the people who stopped watching. And then when trying to replicate David Tennant's era with a new Doctor didn't work, because I think that's probably why Jodie Whittaker, in terms of her personality, feels like such a cobbled together stuff of what people in suits would think was popular about David Tennant and Matt Smith's Doctors, So even that, trying to replicate that personality, that style of Doctor, it had been a long time coming, and ultimately we'd seen that through the Jodie Whittaker era, through her characterisation of the Doctor, through some of the styles of the stories, through bringing Captain Jack back, through some of the stuff even outside of the show, like the multimedia events, the comics, the video games, that when that eventually didn't work, it was kind of the final straw of, if you can't replicate the RTD era, why don't you literally make the RTD era again? If you can't get a writer to replicate RTD style, why not bring back RTD to the show? If you can't get a new Doctor to replicate the personality and therefore gain the popularity of David Tennant's Doctor, how about we just bring David Tennant back and literally wind back the clocks to 2008? As I said, this sort of stuff was a long time coming from the BBC, this kind of idea that in order for Doctor Who to be popular, it needs to be 2008 again, or replicating the feel of the show at that point. And therefore it felt like the natural next step from the BBC to actually bring back the guy who made those stories and actually bring back the Doctor who was in those stories. And I could only ever view it as a cynical attempt by the BBC, as I said, to turn back the clocks to 2008, to try and desperately bring back the people who stopped watching, you know, try and replicate some of that success in a desperate attempt by the BBC, completely negating the only reason why Doctor Who is even still here 60 years on, is because it's allowed to change and grow and, you know, evolve, you know, constantly change itself internally. You know, different writers, different doctors, different styles of stories, different eras with completely different tones and characters and concepts. Doctor Who in 1963 is far different from Doctor Who now. Doctor Who in 1983 is far different from Doctor Who in 2013, and so on. That is the only reason why Doctor Who has been allowed to keep going, is because it refreshes itself. It's never allowed itself to become stale. It always keeps on moving forward, and that's why, you know, Doctor Who, you know, has kept on going, because it constantly regenerates. You know, the Doctor regenerates, but so does the show, so does the people behind the show, and that's why the character of the Doctor has been able to endure. So many different actors bringing their own different stamps on the character, you know, different visions, different characterization, you know, different interpretations of the character played by completely different people, yet all the same person. That is what has allowed the show to stay fresh and keep surviving. The show's moved on, the world's moved on, guys. Doctor Who needs to evolve. And these were all my fears and worries going into these specials, was we're just going to pretend it's 2008 again, it's not for 2008 again. You can't always keep going back, you know, that happened in the past, that era ended, it's time to move on. It's time to let that era rest and go on to pastures new. But not only have these specials only really vindicated my fears going into them, but the whole idea of Bi-Regeneration, if you were listening to that, and you've probably gathered, has infinitely made that so much worse. Because now not only did we bring David Tennant back, he now never has to leave. The RTD 2008 era never has to end. Oh, it feels like something that RTD did purely to spite me. It feels so against everything that I've been, you know, criticising about every single decision being made since RTD's come back. Every single ethos of this, and against everything that I believe in terms of Doctor Who. This completely goes against it. It's a big middle finger up to the ethos of the show, in my opinion. And on top of all that, it's not even good in an isolated bubble in terms of the story. It doesn't even work then. It doesn't work as an ending. It doesn't work as a character arc for Tennant's 14th Doctor. It doesn't work in the lore and the narrative of the show, and it certainly doesn't work for future implications in the show, both narrative-wise and outside broader, you know, contextual aspects of the show itself. None of this works. None of this works. And I can't understand how, not just RTD, but anyone who overlooked this script didn't see the issues with this, didn't see the issues. It's maybe the most misguided idea in Doctor Who history, and I know it sounds hyperbolic, because it does really feel like whenever there's a controversial thing, no, this is the worst thing that's ever happened to Doctor Who, no, this is the worst thing to ever happen in Doctor Who, you know. So everyone said the Timeless Child was the worst thing to happen in Doctor Who, everyone said Hellbent was the first thing to happen in Doctor Who before that. You know, these things keep on coming, and I know it sounds hyperbolic, and I know it sounds just like fans moaning. Trust me, I'm aware of how it sounds. But this really is worse than the Timeless Children for me. Because at least with the idea of the Timeless Child, I think I said it before in this review, it only really affects the narrative of the show, you know, the narrative elements of what we knew about the Doctor, what makes, you know, the Doctor as a character. Perhaps I'm a bit softer on the Timeless Child, because it's over now, and really, we could just kind of ignore it, we could just kind of put it in the corner and say, yes, when we're watching Jodie Whittaker stories, the Timeless Child is a factor, but when I'm watching Tom Baker in Warrior's Gate, I don't have to constantly be thinking, oh my god, he's the Timeless Child. I can think he's from Gallifrey, and it works. The Timeless Child didn't affect my viewing of that. I only put out Warrior's Gate because I remember that was the first Doctor Who story I watched straight after the Timeless Child. God, I have no idea how I remember that. But yeah, you know, it only affects narrative aspects of the show, whereas this has such negative implications outside of the show for how the show is perceived and the show going forward. This idea is the death knell in Doctor Who for me, and I don't mean that in, oh my god, Doctor Who is dead to me, rip Doctor Who. I mean that in the sense that Doctor Who is going to be cancelled now. It's more of a case of when rather than if. Mainly because by shaking this up and, you know, essentially saying that the Doctor doesn't have to change, eras don't have to end, you're removing the core aspect that has allowed Doctor Who to keep thriving, and by removing that, Doctor Who is surefire doomed for cancellation. It might not be soon, it might be in 10 years, but by giving the show the keys to say you don't have to keep moving forward, you don't have to change, the show won't change all the time. No show wants to change when something's popular. The BBC didn't want to let Tennant go in 2009, but they had to because that's the show. It keeps moving forward. You keep refreshing it, even when people don't want to. It has to, and then the show is forced to survive, forced to change, even when the higher-ups don't want it to, and therefore allowed to survive, even against the better judgment of the people making it. Because it's just ingrained in Doctor Who, that's just what it is. No other show would be doing what Doctor Who does, but no show has survived this long. But let's break down this then, let's break down what happens in the Bi-Regeneration, and it's very confusing because no one really has a sure idea of what actually happened with Bi-Regeneration because it's so sloppily explained, if you can even say it's explained at all in the episode. Essentially, the Toymaker shoots the Doctor, he says, oh, I played one game with the first Doctor, one game with the 14th Doctor, it's only fair that I play my final game with a new Doctor, the 15th Doctor. Which, yes, that's fair, from his perspective. Shoots David Tennant. And another reason why this is quite irritating is because I actually quite like his final scene, if it was his final scene. I quite like the final line of Alonzi. It's poignant, but not in a cringe way, like him saying, I'm ready to go. Would have been like those people saying, he should say, I'm ready to go. That would have been very cringe. I'm glad he didn't say that, and I think just a simple Alonzi, and even the fact that he accepts his death, is nice. It's nice. I like the scene. Just a shame it's not his actual ending scene though, is it? Because then, obviously, he doesn't regenerate, and Donna and Mel pull him, and then Ncuti Gatwa comes out, and then you've got two Doctors interacting. Turns out, this regeneration means he didn't change into Ncuti Gatwa. Ncuti Gatwa still appeared, but as a separate entity, he gets to stay as David Tennant. So therefore, you've got two Doctors, two halves of one Doctor. Which is what I thought happens, but then some things have overcomplicated this, but then also I'm not sure other people's ideas totally make sense and are watertight. But yeah, so how I perceived it on the night was, we've got two Doctors, both from the same time stream, they're both the same age, just one looks like Ncuti Gatwa, one stayed as David Tennant, a split. And essentially they both defeat the Toymaker in a really crap game of catch. You know, it's just a really bad end for the Toymaker, and to be honest, the Toymaker himself just gets kind of shafted in terms of this sequence. The focus is completely off him at this point, and it feels like a bit of a damp squid ending, but was such a great character in the story, because the focus purely shifts to Bi-Regeneration, and he's just kind of at the back, just chilling. No focus on him, and then he gets defeated in a really naff way, and then even his ending, you know, he just goes. And it's such a shame for such a great character and a great performance in this episode, that he just kind of gets a bit forgotten about and lost in the mayhem of this ending. It's a bit of a shame. Ncuti Gatwa's Doctor says that, you know, Doctor, you've been just staggering along, you've never stopped, you've just constantly been going at it since you left Gallifrey. Maybe it's time to stop, maybe it's time to have a little breather, have a sit down, reflect on all these things that have happened to you, and actually go through that mental process, have a bit of therapy, allow yourself to unwind, and stay with the Nobles, and then I'll go off and have adventures, and we see him in the Christmas special. Now this is a bit weird for me, because, well, aren't Ncuti and David Tennant supposed to be the same age? Isn't the whole Bi-Regeneration is they're split, the same Time Lord, just one looks like Ncuti Gatwa, one looks like David Tennant. So they're the same age technically, and therefore would have the same trauma. So why would David Tennant stay behind, deal with that trauma, but Ncuti Gatwa can go off, still exploring the universe, and doesn't have to get rid of that trauma? It doesn't make any sense to me, because they're the same person. But then people said, well, what if it actually is not that they're the same person and it's a split? what if Ncuti is actually a future version of David Tennant's Doctor who just happens to appear at that moment, and then David Tennant stays on Earth with the Nobles, and then eventually regenerates into Ncuti Gatwa, and when he regenerates into Ncuti Gatwa, he then, appears at that Bi-Regeneration, and then he goes off. So essentially, David Tennant stays on Earth, and then eventually becomes the Ncuti Gatwa that we see in this episode and goes off. So it's still the same person, just the long way round, shall we say. And that's slightly better, even though I still don't amazingly like it, because then you still could have had the episode end with David Tennant not regenerating, and just said, I'm going to take some time to stay with the Nobles at the end of the story, and, deal with my shit. Stay here, deal with my shit, and then you could have had a little bit of a skip in time, and then he regenerates in Ncuti Gatwa's Doctor. Same thing, you just don't have to have there be two Doctors around and have David Tennant undermine Ncuti Gatwa. Same ending, just avoid all of that mess, but then again we wouldn't have a spare David Tennant Doctor on Earth, and I think I know why that's the case. But even then, I'm not sure that's actually the case, because some of the stuff that Russell says about, I'd like to think that, I won't do a Welsh accent because I can't, but, he said that I like to think that every single Doctor, every single regeneration has bi-regenerated, and in a different timeline, each incarnation of the Doctor never regenerated and got to carry on going, experiencing all those adventures, just staying as that individual incarnation. Hinted a bit in Tales of the TARDIS when Sylvester McCoy says, in some timelines I regenerate, sometimes I'm not, which I thought was a nice little line to explain why he looks older. Apparently not now, when it's tied to all this. Raises the point, if every single Doctor in some timeline bi-regenerated and each incarnation of Doctor got to remain as themselves and got to go off into the universe, then it is a direct split then. One stays as that incarnation and the other just has a different face. So at that point, then this whole idea that, you don't eventually regenerate into your future self is a direct split from you, therefore splitting the Doctor's consciousness into two. That's what happened then, right? Because if all the bi-regeneration in the classic Doctors happened, then the whole reason that Ncuti Gatwa is actually a future incarnation doesn't work, because the logic doesn't align. And it sounds like I'm just theorising here, but that's because the episode never actually concretely states anything. It's actually probably one of the worst things about this, is that it's not explained at all. Bi-regeneration is not explained. Like, when I read the leak, I thought, is this just going to be something that the Toymaker causes? No, it just happens just because, and it's never explained. It says, bi-regeneration is a myth, it's never happened before. Would have been nice if this supposed myth had even been set up or hinted at in this story, but it isn't. It comes out of the blue and it's never explained, and because it's never explained, and there's such a lack of clarification on any of these ideas, we're now left with fans speculating on what the intention or what the actual idea of this even is, because we don't know. That's really sloppy. And going back to how nothing's explained, remember how there was supposed to be a reason why this face came back and why David Tennant regenerated into a new outfit? Remember that there was supposed to be a reason? There wasn't. That's never explained. I mean, there's a half reason of, your face came back because you needed to, slow down, and your face came back because you're wearing yourself out. It was an indicator you wanted to stay with Donna and live a family life. I don't buy that. It's kind of like a half thrown out theory by Donna. It doesn't really track. Are you telling me there's no actual concrete reason as to why the Doctor randomly regenerated into an old face? And the thing is, it's not even like a thing that can be allowed to be unexplained, because throughout these specials he's literally been pondering the question, why did my face come back? And it never really gets answered. We all thought, surely it's something that happened by the Toymaker, but it's not. Surely the outfit is an indication that this is a larger scheme done by the Toymaker or something else. It's not. We never get a reason as to why the Doctor regenerated into these clothes. Why did it happen? We never get an answer. Where did this outfit come from? I don't know, because it's never explained. The face is never explained. The bi-regeneration is never explained. Probably the cardinal sin of all of this is none of it's explained. How are you going to do all this and not explain it, Russell? It's mental. how all set up, no payoff, absolute ridiculous. So many questions with so little answers. The likelihood is they're never getting answers. How can you end a story and end an arc of specials like this with no resolution? It's crazy, and it's so sloppily done that I can't even believe he really did it, I'm gonna be honest. But let's go back to that Doctorverse idea then, that every single Doctor, bi-regenerated. This was the point where I think I just went, maybe Rusty Davies just doesn't understand regeneration, because I don't think he does. I don't think Rusty Davies understands regeneration and the point of it, to be quite honest with you, because I started to think, well, what's the point of having all the Doctors bi-regenerating? In some timeline there's a version where the Doctor never had to regenerate and keeps living as that incarnation, because by having that as like an alternate happy ending that the incarnation never had to change, it implies that you view regeneration and the fact that each incarnation has to change as a tragedy akin to a death. These incarnations went too soon, and in my happy timeline, and they never had to change. But it implies that Rusty Davies views regeneration as a death, that he views the fact that these incarnations didn't get to change and didn't get to live on as a tragedy, when it's not a tragedy. Regeneration isn't a tragedy. It's something that allows the Doctor, and by consequence the show, to keep evolving and moving forward and surviving. Change is good, and some of my best regeneration scenes when the Doctor wholeheartedly embraces that change, because it's not something to be sad about, it's not a tragedy, it's a happy ending. The Doctor gets to keep on living, and change is exciting, change isn't all dull and depressing, change is exciting, and it's necessary in life. The 11th Doctor sums it up, we all change when you think about it. We're all different people all for our lives. That's okay, that's good. You've got to keep moving as long as you remember all the people that you used to be. You remember the old Doctors, but the whole point is that you change and evolve. It's not a tragedy that the Doctors regenerate, because it's not individual incarnations dying. It's the same person. Like, each incarnation isn't a completely different person who changes into a different person. It's the same character, it's the same person, just with slightly different mannerisms and quirks in each incarnation, but it's fundamentally the same character. It's not a death. It's not each individual people that die and it's a tragedy they didn't get to live on. And when looking at bi-regeneration, looking at this idea of the Doctorverse, it made me think Rusty Davies doesn't understand the concept of regeneration. Not really, because he thinks it's a death, he thinks it's a tragedy when incarnations don't get to live on, when really it's a miracle, it's something to be celebrated. The change, it allows the Doctor to survive, because these aren't individual people dying, it's the same man, the same person, being allowed to survive, just refreshing himself. The same man, different quirks and mannerisms, but fundamentally the same person. But Rusty Davies doesn't see that, and I thought, well, Rusty Davies clearly doesn't understand regeneration if he thinks the Doctorverse is a good idea. And then it made me think, well, hold on, this isn't the first time that Rusty Davies has done something like this, is it? And then it made me think that really, Rusty Davies isn't just doing controversial stuff and not really understanding the point of the show in these specials. It's something that exists in his original era anyway, because I was reminded of a new man goes sauntering away in my clothes and I'm dead. The end of time. So in the end of time, the Doctor views regeneration as a death. As I said, the iconic line, a new man goes sauntering away in my clothes and I'm dead. He's not actually dying, but he views regeneration as a dead. Me, myself, I die, a new man comes along. And the difference between him, not wanting to go, and Capaldi is because with Capaldi's, he goes on an arc in the episode, and by the end, he's like, yeah, change is necessary, and accepts that change. Whereas, and the big indicator for me, is that the 10th Doctor never accepts that change at all. There's never a point at the end of time where he's like, yep, I was sceptical before, but now I need to change because that's what I do. He's bitter to the very end, to the very point he changes. He's bitter, right up into the point where his final line is, I don't want to go. He's still terrified, he still hates the idea, he's so against change right up to the end. And I think we all thought that the Doctor viewing change as a death for this one exclusive time was a specific, intentional character flaw of the 10th Doctor. But putting it in context with Bi-Regeneration and the idea of the Doctorverse, it clearly wasn't an intentional character flaw. It's just how RTD views regeneration. A new man goes sauntering away in my clothes and I'm dead isn't an intentional, selfish viewpoint from the 10th Doctor. It's how Rusty Davies, the writer, actually views the process of regeneration. He views the next Doctor as a new man sauntering away in the previous incarnation's clothes while that previous incarnation is dead. Because if you didn't believe that, why else would you think it's, a happy ending and undercuts the tragedy that each incarnation gets to live on and doesn't have to change? Why would you view them having to change as a tragedy, in the same way that he viewed the 10th Doctor having to change as a tragedy, as a death? So this idea of regeneration has been lingering in his previous era. Obviously, even though that aspect felt like it was sabotaging Matt Smith, everyone knew that Tennant had lots of fans who would be tempted to switch off anyway, but really pushing the point that, the new Doctor, he's not me, he's a new man going to saunter away, and the version of me that you love, that you connected to, he'll be dead, really did sabotage Matt Smith and persuade people to think, no, I'm not going to try the new Doctor, because he's not really the Doctor that I love, he's a new man, my Doctor died in this story. But the thing is, why people had to give Matt Smith a chance is because David Tennant was gone. Regardless of what you thought, regardless of how much that undercut David Tennant, he was gone. Matt Smith was the Doctor, to quote Colin Baker, whether you like it or not. And that's what always works, and that's what always gets you to love a new Doctor, and gets you to acclimatise to them, because even if you love the previous incarnation, they're gone in a flash, and you're stuck with this new incarnation now, so you better get to love them. It allows you to accept the change because you're not directly comparing them to the previous Doctor, the previous established Doctor, to someone who's new in the role. Obviously, you're not going to have that same affinity to them. Obviously, initially, they're not going to seem as good as this previous stalwart, so it's good that the change is always, done and dusted, It's one to another. The new Doctor comes in, the old Doctor's completely gone. That's your Doctor now, nothing to compare it to, you better like him. That's the biggest difference, I think, between the ethos in the End of Time and the ethos in this story, because Tennant sticks around in Ncuti's first scene and beyond, and I felt so bad for Ncuti because it completely undercuts him, it completely undercuts his first moments, and to be honest, I think Ncuti's doing a fine job. He's still clearly getting to grips with the role, but I thought he certainly showed promise. But to be honest, it's really hard for him because he's competing against David Tennant, the people's favourite Doctor. You're obviously not going to come out of that with flying colours. And lots of people thought that Ncuti held his own. I don't think he did, and it's no disrespect to him because I don't think he could have with the script he was given. Because he is directly competing with David Tennant. And watching that scene again, and I thought it on the night, it really does feel that he's a supporting character. He's almost a companion in the similar vein as Donna is. Tennant is still the main Doctor in that ending. He's still the one you're focusing on. He's still the one that commands. He's still the main Doctor. Ncuti just plays it as a side character, which I think is a really harmful first scene, an introduction for him to have as the Doctor, for him to not get centre stage like a new Doctor should. It completely undercuts him in his opening moments, to be there directly competing with David Tennant, not just any Doctor, but the people's favourite Doctor. Everyone loves David Tennant, and people say he's the definitive Doctor. So why would you give Ncuti that task of having to compete with that? Having him there while people can directly compare him to the previous stalwart that people love. It's a bonkers decision that only sets Ncuti up for failure. I have no idea why Rusty Davies would even introduce that element, why he would add that scene, why he would allow that to happen. To have a new Doctor's first scene be competing with everyone's favourite Doctor, allowing that direct comparison to happen on screen. Bonkers, and I feel so bad for Ncuti because it completely undercuts him. And as I said, he showed promise, and in the Christmas special trailer, he looks pretty good. I'm really excited to see him because I've got a good feeling about his Doctor, and I hope he delivers. But this scene really did him no favours because he's not allowed to as a character. David Tennant sticks around, the focus is still on him. And David Tennant sticks around at the end. Ncuti goes off on his adventures, but David Tennant gets his own TARDIS. He still hanging around, so throughout the entirety of Ncuti's run, David Tennant is still the Doctor. He's still the Doctor, technically. He's still hanging around. That has never happened before. That has never happened where the new Doctor isn't the only Doctor around. The old Doctor doesn't go. He doesn't have to go. He still sticks around, and you've got 2 Doctors. And as I said, it's going to make it harder for people to love and accept Ncuti's Doctor when David Tennant is still hanging around, the people's favourite. And you know, Tennant said he didn't want to go. I guess he never has to now. And it's the, you know, the idea that you've got all those Tennant fans who stopped watching when Matt Smith left because they only love David Tennant and have been refusing to give up on the idea that Tennant is the only Doctor and he's the best Doctor and, you know, he's the only one that they love. Well, they don't. Now they never have to let him go because he's always gonna be there. Oh, what on earth? Do you guys remember where we all thought this trilogy of specials would be a meta-commentary on how it's actually bad to just bring up the past and things all have an ending and things have to go, and it'll be a meta-commentary on how ultimately, you know, just bringing things back for the sake of it is bad and you should be allowed to end eras. The Toymaker will be a stand-in for an entitled fandom, because RTD would never just bring back elements of nostalgia if he just were to have a nostalgia fest. Oh no, Rusty Davies would obviously be subverting that, using the nostalgia to tell a story about how nostalgia is bad, because Rusty Davies would never do a story on how eras don't have to end. Yeah, remember when we all thought that was going to be a thing? Oh my god, it couldn't have been further from the truth, could it? Tennant just never has to leave. And yeah, it's just really bad. He is still the Doctor. Tennant is still the Doctor for all intents and purposes. And the thing is, Ncuti seems like a clone. And in effect of the story, he isn't. But just in general, he kind of is though, isn't he? Because he shoots off of the main Doctor. And I think the cardinal sin is his TARDIS is a copy of the original TARDIS. He doesn't get the main TARDIS. David Tennant gets to keep the main TARDIS. He gets a copy. You're really making it out like your new Doctor isn't the proper Doctor. He's an offshoot. And the main Doctor is still Tennant. The main Doctor gets to stay on Earth with Tennant. That's his ending. The new Doctor is an offshoot. Why would you do that? Why would you do that? Especially, and this is something that I honestly cannot believe no one thought of. I can't believe Rusty Davies didn't think it. I can't believe no one, absolutely no one who overlooked this script thought of these connotations. The racial optics of all of this are absolutely dreadful, by the way, because, and how none of them thought of this, and no one looked at script and thought of that, I don't know, because Ncuti, as we know, is the first black actor to play the Doctor. And you're going to get lots of racists saying, he's not the proper Doctor, the Doctor can never be black, and it's like, guys, go back to the Stone Age where you ever so clearly belong. But you're giving these racists, you're giving them something to latch onto. Now people can say, David Tennant is the last proper Doctor, you know, Ncuti's not a proper... Ncuti Gatwa isn't the proper Doctor. The real Doctor, well, you know, died with David Tennant. The real Doctor, you know, is David Tennant, and Ncuti's just an imposter. He's not the proper Doctor. The real Doctor's David Tennant. That's where the show really ended. I've seen tweets saying David Tennant is the Doctor, Ncuti Gatwa is just Ncuti Gatwa. Obviously a bad copy-pasta from the Spider-Man's Peter Parker, Miles Morales is just Miles Morales, which is obviously racist. But I've seen tweets like this. Saying David Tennant's the proper Doctor, Ncuti Gatwa isn't. And that has been allowed. This racism, giving racists the opportunity to say this, to say that Ncuti Gatwa isn't the proper Doctor and David Tennant is. You've given them this opportunity. They wouldn't have been able to have this opportunity and have a leg to stand on without you giving them this. You've given them this. And for what? I can't believe. And I mean, I looked at this and thought this as soon as I saw the initial leak. I thought, boy, why are you making it seem like the first Black Doctor is an offshoot and the real proper Doctor gets to live his life in peace as David Tennant? Why would you do that? Why would you not only jeopardise your new actor, but why would you jeopardise this? It's mental. And as I said, Rusty Davies, and I'm going to say this because he said it in the Davros thing, as a man who supposedly cares about the optics, boy did you not think about the optics on this one, because if you did, you would have known this is not a good thing to do. Why would you do that? You give racists an inch, they'll take a mile. Why would you do that? But he did it. How no one thought of the racial optics of this astounds me, absolutely astounds me. because I just don't understand how no one saw this. There's a massive oversight, and the racial stuff in this isn't great, because there's a really dodgy line where Donna says, I think to paraphrase, "Oh, so you come in different colours." How is that not incredibly racist? Because it is. It's a blatant racist line, and I can't believe that made it in as well. I can't believe someone wrote that line and thought, yes, that makes sense. I mean, it doesn't even make sense in context, because Donna, your husband is black, your daughter is mixed race. Why is just seeing a black man so weird to you that you had to make a comment on it? Bit weird, and doesn't even make sense in character. But yeah, why? It's not even some extraordinary thing that why didn't you think the Doctor could become black? It's not that weird, you know. What? Why would you make a comment on it? It's so strange. And it's just a blatant racist line, so I have no idea how that made it in. And someone like Rusty Davis, who champions progressiveness and champions being aware of the optics, boy, did you negate to look at the optics on that one. Boy, oh boy. Still quite a way to go if we want the show to really be progressive. And maybe if you want the show to be truly progressive, shouldn't have this 60-year-old white man in charge of the show who's already been in charge of the show before. Because as much as Russell can try and be progressive, there's clearly some boundaries there with him, where he's making some very dodgy errors, from the dead naming stuff in the first episode to the stuff in this. It's not great. Really not great. There's a real danger, and this isn't even unfounded by me, because it happened in the show's classic run. The real danger in tying a particular actor to a role like this, by having a character like the Doctor which thrives on the character changing and being played by multiple different people, and the audience need to be open for that. The audience need to accept that this character is played by multiple different people, and you're going to get a new Doctor every few years, and you need to accept them. You know, a character that relies on that, there's a real danger with, you know, a character that relies on being played by a multitude of different people, tying that character to a particular actor, tying that character, a character of many faces, tying that character and the audience's perception of that character to a particular face, to a particular actor. And it happened with Tom Baker in the classic run. Tom Baker was the Doctor for 7 years, and he was the Doctor for too long. As much as I love Tom Baker, he became so synonymous with the character that for so many people, the Doctor wasn't this man who could change. The Doctor was Tom Baker. So by having some people get so used to the Doctor being played by a particular face, and getting them to love a Doctor being played by a particular face, and, you know, that being their vision of how the Doctor should be, it made it hard for anyone who came after Tom Baker to make much of an impact, to be loved by the audience with open arms, to be really accepted, because he wasn't Tom Baker. Peter Davison, Colin Baker, they weren't a Tom Baker. And I think particularly for Peter Davison it was very hard, and it essentially screwed all 3 actors in the 80s, because they were coming after Tom Baker, who had epitomised and had just become the Doctor for so many people. The Doctor wasn't a man of many faces, he was just Tom Baker. And by doing that, by associating a shape-changing character like the Doctor with one particular actor, you've kind of doomed the character, because, you know, at that point, as soon as the Doctor becomes too associated with one actor, it makes it harder to then change that actor and get people to accept future actors when you get them to love one actor in particular, when you get the character associated with one actor in particular for maybe too long. It makes it hard for the audience to accept new actors, new interpretations, because they're so attached to that previous incarnation, that portrayal and that interpretation. And that essentially dooms the classic series, because all other Doctors weren't really universally loved, but it's not a surprise, because it was always hard to be loved by an audience when you're coming off the back of Tom Baker, because the character had become associated with one actor for so long. Really, Tom Baker leaving kind of was the first nail in the coffin of the show, you could argue. And it's coming again. People often think of David Tennant when they think of the Doctor anyway. He's become synonymous of when the show was good, or it was David Tennant. David Tennant's the Doctor for so many people. And that was only going to worsen by bringing him back, because then you're familiarising people with how good Tennant is as a Doctor, reminding them of Tennant as this character. And therefore, in their heads, they're going to become more attached to the Doctor is David Tennant, the Doctor's written and acted and performed and characterised this way, and are making them more adverse to any other interpretations, portrayals of this character, any future actors, by once again reassociating this character with one particular actor, with one particular portrayal, it makes it hard for anyone else to follow. And there's a real danger by having a character like the Doctor attached to any particular actor. It happened with Tom Baker, and I feel like we're at the point where the BBC has allowed it to happen with David Tennant. People say David Tennant is this generation's Tom Baker, and I think he is, but not in the ways that people mean by that. I mean in the sense that he's become too associated with the character of the Doctor that it's hard for people, particularly people who aren't super fans, to associate the character with any other actor. And it'll make people hard to accept and love Ncuti Gatwa, I'm sure of it, because the Doctor is being attached to one particular actor. So when people see other portrayals, they'll be like, oh, that's not the Doctor. I want the Doctor to be like David Tennant, and we'll reject any future interpretations. And there's a danger, because as soon as you do that, as soon as you get people not allowing, not being accepting of the idea that the Doctor changes, getting so hell-bent and stuck on one incarnation, and therefore not being allowed to really change the incarnation of the Doctor, you've doomed future incarnations, and you're either doomed with a set of incarnations that people will never truly love, which will probably end with the show being cancelled, or you're doomed with just bringing the same bloke as the Doctor again, which will eventually get stale, and the show will probably be cancelled. So I think there's a real danger with associating the Doctor with one particular actor, because it just makes it hard for any other actors to be accepted afterwards. And I think that the BBC have done that again with David Tennant by bringing him back, and not only bringing him back, but having him stick around. He is constantly the Doctor now. You've created this problem, and it's a bit of a separate one from Tom Baker, because he just stayed too long. Whereas the BBC have created the role for their own backs here by bringing David Tennant back again after years, reminding the audience, who are probably still hung up on him anyway, how good he is in direct comparison to the new Doctor, and also having David Tennant just stick around now, so people can always say he's always the Doctor. How can Ncuti Gatwa even succeed in an environment like this? It's crazy. It's crazy, because people always associate David Tennant as being the Doctor now. He will always be the Doctor. David Tennant's shadow will be constantly looming over Ncuti Gatwa's series. You know, there was always a case that might happen anyway, but quite literally now it will. David Tennant will be looming over Ncuti Gatwa's series. There's the plot holes, obviously, of, you know, if David Tennant is hanging out with the nobles on present-day Earth, when we have Earth-set stories and there's invasions, why isn't David Tennant helping out? Why isn't the Doctor helping out? Are we saying that David Tennant would sit out on these invasions? You know, when the Earth is being destroyed, the Doctor, regardless of incarnation, would just sit out and say, oh, my other incarnation can sort that out. No, he'd go to help. And now whenever there's an Earth invasion, it will create a big plot hole as to, well, where's the other Doctor during this? And that's the plot holes that you've opened up. I can overlook it, though. I certainly think I can overlook stupid plot holes like that over David Tennant actually coming back in the show. I really hope he doesn't, because if they keep bringing David Tennant back as a supporting character, you've ruined Ncuti Gatwa's Doctor, because you're really not giving him a chance. You've ruined the idea that the Doctor changes new incarnations by being so hell-bent on focusing on a previous incarnation as a constant. The idea is the Doctor isn't a constant, he keeps on changing. You have allowed David Tennant to become the constant. And that's going to break the character, and allow the character to stop enduring for so many years. And yeah, it's opened up plot holes, but I really hope, you know, I take that as the alternative to having David Tennant come back, because I really don't want him to appear in the finale of Ncuti's second series or rubbish like that. But I'm worried it will, and there's already the rumours of the Unit spin-off. I already said in this that it felt like they were just setting up this Unit spin-off. What if this setup of David Tennant and Catherine Tate sticking around is so they appear in the Unit spin-off? That would be terrible. As soon as you have a counter show to the main show with a really popular Doctor appearing in it, you've doomed the future episodes. That would be the most brain-dead decision that I honestly can see the BBC doing it, to be honest. But honestly, that would be so ridiculous. Because having another show with the Doctor everyone likes, running alongside a new Doctor show, everyone's just going to watch the Tennant show. You've doomed Ncuti Gatwa. Again, you've doomed his era. And I feel so bad for Ncuti Gatwa in all of this, because he should be allowed the clean break to allow his incarnation to have that cultural recognition, to make his statement on the audience, to make an impact, just like all Doctors have had before him. And he's not being given that chance because of Bi-Regeneration. It's so frustrating, and that's who I feel sorry for, Ncuti Gatwa, because his whole idea's completely shafted him. Above all of, the in-universe, the out-of-universe stuff, even contained to this, ignoring the future implications, it's not even a good ending for David Tennant's Doctor. Because as I said, this whole idea that he's been staggering along, never any time to have a break. It's not something that's been set up in the specials, it's just something that Donna randomly mentions in the special. Why wasn't this an arc? Why wasn't this an arc across the 3 specials? It's not, it's just randomly brought up here, so it doesn't even feel thematic, it doesn't even feel like an arc that gets a payoff, it's something that's randomly tossed up here, and then it becomes the backbone for Tennant's ending here. It's stupid why there was no more setup in that, I have no idea, because you can at least allow it to be thematic, it doesn't get that chance. But also, the Doctor has had the opportunity to sit down and relax and reflect and therapize and enjoy the quiet life. Time of the Doctor is all about that. Oh my god. My favourite part of the story, my favourite part of Time of the Doctor is the Doctor finally getting that normal life. Finally getting the time to sit down, enjoy the quiet life. Become loved in a setting in a town. He ditches the lonely god and becomes the whimsical, kind, humble children's hero, fighting monsters and fixing toys. That's who he is. And people say, oh, but that was a full-on war, it's a full-on siege. It's not a full-on siege. He has time to relax, reflect, become ingrained in the town, live the quiet life. As he says, everyone gets stuck somewhere. And he finally gets to enjoy that peaceful real life, embrace himself within a community in a quiet little town. On his final life, in the final things he's going to do before he dies, he enjoys that quiet life. He's allowed to reflect and come to terms with who he is. That's the beauty of Time of the Doctor. Him fighting monsters on Trenzalore, to me, is akin to old men who, when they retire, just play golf every so often to keep them occupied in their retirement. That's what I view the Doctor fighting monsters as on Trenzalore. Just a little thing to keep him, from being bored, because he's the Doctor. It's still natural on him to want to fight monsters and go on adventures, but he still lives the quiet life. It's the perfect blend. It's beautiful, and boy do I love Time of the Doctor. So that literally happened. So that completely makes this a bit pointless, because, well, he did do that, and the fact you're not acknowledging that is a bit annoying. Because he did do that, and then people were like, oh, but it's so he can cope through the events of Flux, but it's not, because Ncuti Gatwa says, since you left Gallifrey, mentions all the stuff throughout the years of Doctor Who, mentions stuff from the first Doctor's era, like Marvick Chen, and stuff like that. So yeah, supposedly, you never stopped once since your first incarnation, when it's a complete load of nonsense he has. It doesn't work because it's not something that's been set up in the episode, so it doesn't even work on a thematic character level, ignoring the out-of-show implications. It doesn't even work on a thematic character level, because it's not set up at all, so it doesn't feel like a satisfying ending for this Doctor. And we've seen him live the quiet life before. It's just not great. I can't even appreciate it on the level that it's a nice ending to David Tennant's Doctor. I can't appreciate it on that, because I don't think it works even on that level. And I think, again, the worst thing of that is that he gets his own TARDIS, or he doesn't get his own TARDIS. He keeps the TARDIS, and Ncuti gets his own TARDIS. Oh. But yeah, so if he's really going to commit to the quiet life, why would he have his own TARDIS? So he can just leave the Nobles and go on other adventures in between when he wants. Isn't that just the Doctor's life anyway? And nothing really changes then, does it? It is just essentially 2 Doctors hanging around just because. Yeah, the ending doesn't work for me on any level, it's all pointless. And when I say we've been here before, we've done this before, I'm not just talking about the idea of the Doctor, living a peaceful life, being able to take a break and therapize like we did in Time of the Doctor. Russell T Davies has literally done this idea before. The idea of 2 Doctors, one gets to go off in the TARDIS and have adventures, the other stays behind with a companion to live a peaceful, normal life. We've done this before in Journey's End. The Meta-Crisis Doctor. We've done this before with the 2 Doctors, one splitting off, going and having a happy life, the other staying and having, a normal day-to-day life. And staying at home with a companion. We've done this before. So not only is this crap and awful, it's just a rehash of a plot point we had before in Rusty Davis's original run. We've been here before, and it obviously works better in that because, yes, you had two Doctors, but they were both David Tennant, so the meta-crisis obviously doesn't overshadow David Tennant's Doctor because David Tennant was still the Doctor, if that makes sense. So you've not got a new Doctor to overshadow because the Doctor staying behind is the same as the new one. And also the Doctor staying behind was in a parallel universe that was cut off and you can never go back to. So it's more of a closed book type moment than this is, which is David Tennant. It opens the door for him to come back. So it's essentially a worse version of the Meta-Crisis Doctor. But the more you think about it, the more it very much is just the Meta-Crisis Doctor. Again, literally beat for beat, the same concept. It was bad, but it's not even original from Rusty Davis. We've been here before, so not only is it controversial and crap, it's a rehash of another concept Rusty Davis has already done. We've seen this plotline before. So above all of that, it's lazy. I've been thinking lots of the decisions the BBC have been doing are incredibly cynical and desperate. But no decision more, though, feels more like that than this. This is the end game of them trying to wind back the clock to 2008. Because to me, above all this and above everything I've spoken about, the real reason why I think Bi-Regeneration has been done is as a sort of safety net. A cynical move by the BBC that says, we'll take a punt on the new Doctor, but if he doesn't work, we've always got Tennant waiting in the wings to bring him back and refresh popularity in the show like we did this time around. In order to do something like this again and not have to really explain it, there we go. We've got Tennant waiting in the wings as our safety net in case Ncuti Gatwa doesn't work out. We can always bring back Tennant, and we can keep bringing back Tennant as long as we want, as long as we need to refresh popularity, just in case Ncuti isn't a success. A safety net, a precaution. I think it's that cynical and desperate, but is so bad on Ncuti Gatwa. And it's so against the ethos of the show. When you bring in a new Doctor, you have faith that that incarnation is going to be the best Doctor yet. You fully commit to that. Each Doctor, you fully commit to that. Whether they're great, whether they're rubbish, doesn't matter. You're committed. You're locked in. You're committed to that incarnation. But they don't seem to be committed to Ncuti Gatwa's Doctor. They don't seem to have much faith. Because they're not so sure it's going to be a success. If you were so sure, why would you have this sort of safety net, which is what it seems just keeping Tennant around in the background in case you need to bring him back, in case you need to do another 60th set of specials to bring back old fans again. But that's just such a middle finger up to Ncuti. To say, like, yeah, we're keeping Tennant in the wings as a safety net because we don't fully have faith in your incarnation. Unlike every single other incarnation, you've not got our utmost trust that you're going to be a surefire hit. So we're keeping someone in the wings just in case you're not. But as I said, with a new incarnation of Doctor, you've got to commit, you've got to commit. And it seems like they're not. It seems that they're just keeping Tennant around because if all else fails, the show can always turn the clocks back to 2008 again. In a cynical and desperate move by the BBC, that is sure to get the show cancelled by forcing the show to not have to evolve, just rely on the past. It's against the ethos of Doctor Who, and it now, for me, the show being cancelled is more of a case of just when rather than if, because it's gone against the entire ethos of the show, and the BBC clearly don't understand why Doctor Who has kept on going for so long, why it's kept on surviving. They're only focused on the past, and that the past was popular, and we're going to keep regurgitating the past rather than going in new directions. For all eternity. The show is stuck in a time loop, it will seem. And boy do I hope that Ncuti's a success. I hope he's a surefire success. So we never have to see these BBC's future plans to focus on David Tennant again. But even if Ncuti's a success, maybe the next Doctor isn't, and then they'll plan to bring in Tennant again. Just commit to new incarnations. That's how the show has kept on moving forward. And by keeping a Doctor hanging around, you're kind of sabotaging the new Doctor by having the cloud over his head for his entire run. Having an incarnation of David Tennant be able to stay and exist concurrently. The BBC and Rusty Davis I don't think understands the point of regeneration, but I think they understand the point of the character, understands the point of the Doctor, the point of the show. And I thought Rusty Davies did. You know, when I had that announcement of Rusty Davies was coming back, my overall thoughts was, I'm a bit concerned, but what will happen is Rusty Davies will probably be, if a little rehashed, if a little uninspiring, but safe. Uninspired, rehashing, but safe pair of hands for the show to be in. But I don't even think you can say that about these specials, about this, because I don't think he gets it. I don't think he gets the show. I don't think he gets regeneration. I don't think he gets, in this instance, the character of the Doctor. It really does seem that Rusty Davies doesn't understand that eras have to end, or every other era has to end, apart from my own. All your eras, you've got to end, but not mine. My era of Doctor Who gets to live on forever and ever, and never has to end. Which just sounds very selfish and very egotistical, if that was the thought process from Rusty Davies surrounding this. That every other era has to end, but not his, because his era is special. It just strikes me of a man who's stuck in the past, and it doesn't give me much hope for Ncuti Gatwa's run. Because maybe we will just be rehashing plot points and characters and elements of Rusty Davies 1, of his first era. The show won't be able to let go of his first era, because seemingly he doesn't want to either. Oh boy was this bad, boy was this bad. In-universe, out-of-universe, implications on the show, top to bottom, bad. Ah boy, this was not good, and it was bad in the leaks, but so much worse watching it actually. Yeah, this was not good, and in a sense I was glad it was leaked, because I imagine watching it and not knowing it was coming, I probably would have been a lot angrier, and a bit of a shock to the system watching it. But yeah, having it leaked, in a sense, was a good thing, because I'd kind of already got to grips with the idea, and when I watched it was like, oh, they're doing this or not. Anger. More of just a disappointment, really, but more of a calmness to it. So in that sense, I guess it was good it was leaked, it was good we knew beforehand, but it doesn't really make it any better. I just feel sorry for Ncuti, because it's completely undercut him in numerous ways. It's completely undercut his introduction of the Doctor, his incarnation, his fresh, clean break start. He's completely been undercut, and his first scene has been undercut, his era's been undercut. I just feel so bad, because so many of these decisions are not helping him at all. And I feel bad for him, because it was his first scene, but because of Bi-Regeneration, the focus wasn't on him. And after this episode, the focus isn't on him, the focus isn't on the new Doctor. And going into his first episode, I think that's a real shame. Probably the worst thing this ending does. Maybe the biggest misstep in Doctor Who history. I can't think of any others. It's not made me excited for RTD 2 whatsoever. Yeah, and it's just a shame that these specials have unfortunately ended on a damp squib and with a bad taste in my mouth. Massive shame. But yes, thank you guys for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. Oh boy, was this a long one. I had a feeling I might ramble on, and it certainly seemed to be the case. Really sorry for this taking so long to get out. I mean, as I said, ever since the episodes aired, I've been so busy, and I'm even busier after this because Christmas is coming up. I'm going back home, so when I'm going to actually get this edited, I have no idea. It may be even longer after recording this, and it's already been a week since the episode aired recording this. I wonder, how much longer it'll be when I even get this out, It's just a very busy time, If anyone from the BBC is watching, you're probably offended at what I've had to say, but, if any of you are watching, please don't air a special again around December time, if it's not on Christmas, because allow me to have some time to actually get the review out when I'm not super busy. But yeah, sorry, it's taken an absolutely insane amount of time to get this out. I know it's very late, and I know this probably wouldn't get the views it would have done if I'd uploaded it after the episode aired. Unfortunately, as I said, I literally didn't have the time, otherwise I would have. But yeah, I hope regardless you guys aren't too annoyed about the wait, and yeah, I will try and get my review of The Church on Ruby Road, which is just around the corner. Christmas is just around the corner, our first Christmas special in a while. Ncuti Gatwa and Millie Gibson's first episode. Despite what I've said in this review, I am actually very excited. I'm very excited for a new era, a new Doctor, a fresh start. This is what I was most excited for after Jodie Whittaker. 6 year specials, I've said the whole time, could take it or leave it. This is what I'm really excited for. And yeah, I hope it's good, because the trailer looked pretty decent. And yeah, hopefully it's good. I've got good vibes about Ncuti, good vibes about Miller Gibson, so hopefully it's good. I certainly think it will be. I certainly don't think it'll be as controversial as this episode anyway. But yeah, fingers crossed it's good. And yeah, I'll try and get my review of that out as quick as possible. Certainly won't be as big of a gap between the episode going out and the review coming out as this has been. And again, I really apologise for the wait. Unfortunately, my life just got really busy. Couldn't be helped, unfortunately. But yeah, what do you think of the Giggle and Bi-Regeneration in general? Quite a controversial topic, quite a controversial episode. Do you agree with me? I'm sure some of you didn't. Whatever you thought, drop your thoughts in the comment section below. I'll be really interested to read them, and let's have a discussion. That's always really, really fun. And yeah, of course, like the video if you enjoyed it, you know. Subscribe if you were seeing more content from me, and subscribe if you were. Make sure you watch that upcoming review of the Church of Ruby Road. I may do a little overview of my overall thoughts on the 6th year specials as well if I find the time. That might be interesting. I might rewatch them and see how I feel about them, knowing where they're going. So yeah, I might do that, so stay tuned if you want to see that as well. But yeah, thank you guys for watching. Oh boy, nice to finally end this recording. And of course, a goodbye.